Welcome, dear listener. You've just found a place where real stories about family sacrifice and sometimes heartbreak come to life. If you believe in lessons from love and betrayal, and you don't want to miss the next one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and share where you're listening from. Tonight's story is called I Left Everything to My Neighbors, Not a Single Cent to My Son. I was 58 when I signed my name at the bottom of the paper that would shock everyone I knew. My hand didn't tremble, though my heart did. The words were printed in clean legal ink, but each one carried the weight of years of sacrifice, years of being ignored, years of being told I was not enough. I left everything to my neighbors, I whispered to myself. Not a single cent to my son. Those words sound cruel when spoken out loud, don't they? Father turning his back on his only child. But cruelty, I have learned, is not always in the action. Sometimes cruelty is in the silence of a phone that never rings or in the way your own blood can look right through you as if you were invisible. I built my life around one boy, my son. I worked overtime shifts as a mechanic when my back already screamed in pain. I sold the small plot of land Maria and I once dreamed of retiring on just to cover his college tuition. I lived in a house that leaked when it rained because every extra dollar went to making sure he had a roof that didn't. And yet, at every family dinner, every gathering, I saw the change. He sat closer to his wife's parents than to me. He laughed at their stories dressed in their style, copied their way of speaking as if the man who raised him, who changed his diapers, who patched his knees after a fall, was just a shadow in the room. I'll never forget the night it became clear. Thanksgiving. The house was filled with the scent of roasted turkey, laughter, glasses clinking. I'd been invited, or so I thought. But when I arrived, I was met with a look from my daughter-in-law that froze me on the doorstep. "This is just for family tonight," she said. Her voice sugar-coated, but her eyes sharp as glass. Family. I stood there, the man who had given his blood and sweat for this boy, and was told I wasn't family. My son stood behind her, silent, shifting uncomfortably, unable or unwilling to speak for me. That walk home in the cold November night was the longest of my life. The leaves crunched underfoot. The air smelled of wood smoke, but all I felt was the emptiness of being erased. I think that was the night Maria's voice came back to me. She's been gone for years, my sweet Maria. But I could almost hear her whisper, Mac's love isn't always where you expect it. It's where it's shown. And strangely, it wasn't my son who had shown it. It was the neighbor's Mrs. Carter who always knocked on my door with an extra pie saying she baked too much. Mr. Hill, who helped me shovel the driveway after a snowstorm when my joints were stiff. They didn't share my blood, but they shared their kindness. Blood makes you related, but kindness makes you family. So I made my choice. The lawyer looked at me with raised brows when I told him. "Are you sure?" he asked. His pen hovered above the page. "Yes," I said. My voice did not shake this time. "Make it so that, when I'm gone, the people who stood by me get the home, the savings, everything I have. And make it clear not a cent goes to my son." The lawyer nodded slowly, almost with respect, and began to write. That was the day I signed the will nobody expected. It wasn't revenge, not in the way people like to think. It was justice. It was dignity. It was the only way left to tell my son love is not a one-way street. And one day, when that paper is read aloud, he will finally understand what silence and disregard have cost him. The ink on the will was barely dry when the memories came rushing back, the kind of memories that gnaw at you in the quiet hours of the night. I remember the sound of the garage door rattling shut, long after sunset, my boots heavy with oil and dust. Back then, I worked double shifts as a mechanic. My hands stayed cracked and black-stained no matter how much soap I scrubbed with. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Every hour I spent under the hood of someone else's car, I thought of the boy waiting at home, the boy I promised Maria I would raise into a man. When he was a child, everything I did was for him. I skipped vacations, turned down nights out with friends, even sold Maria's old jewelry pieces she loved to pay for his soccer league, his braces, his first car. Each sacrifice felt worth it. His smile was my paycheck. His future was the only retirement plan I had. Then came college. He wanted to go out of state somewhere big and expensive. I didn't have the heart to tell him no. So I put our little patch of land up for sale. The land Maria and I once dreamed of building a small cabin on. That dream vanished with the stroke of a pen replaced by his acceptance letter. When the tuition bills came, I worked myself raw to cover what scholarships didn't. I ate canned beans for dinner while he posted pictures of himself in fancy coffee shops with classmates. He never asked where the money came from. He never noticed how my clothes grew older while his wardrobe was always new. Later, when he married Jenna, the expenses grew even steeper. They wanted a down payment for a house just to get started, he said. I took out a loan against my own home against the place Maria and I built brick by brick. I remember the banker's eyes soft with pity as he looked at the numbers. Are you sure, Mr. Flores, you're putting everything at risk? I was sure. I told him, it's for my son. Everything I have is for him. And so I signed. Again and again I signed. Every check, every loan, every sacrifice scribbled with my name across the bottom, as though my signature was the only currency that mattered. What did I get in return? I got to sit at dinners, where conversations flowed right past me as if I was the hired help. I got to hear whispers from Jenna about how old-fashioned I was, how my work as a mechanic was embarrassing compared to her father, the banker. I got to see my son nod along with her, choosing silence over loyalty. But the clearest memory, the one that burned itself into my chest, was the day he told me I wasn't needed anymore. Not in words, but in actions. He stood tall in his new house, the house my loans had secured, and said, "Dad, we've got it from here." His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile you give to a stranger. I walked through that house once looking at the granite countertops, the polished wood floors, the framed pictures of vacations I was never invited to. Every corner whispered back at me, "This isn't yours. You just paid for it." And still, I forgave. Again and again. Because that's what fathers do, isn't it? They give and give even when their pockets are empty, even when their hearts are bruised. But sitting in that lawyer's office, I finally realized something Maria had tried to teach me years ago: love without respect is slavery. And I was done being a slave to the ungrateful. That's why the will matters. It isn't about money, it's about finally putting value where it belongs, in the hands of those who showed up when it mattered. It was supposed to be just another Sunday dinner, but I remember it as the night the last pieces of respect between me and my son began to crumble. Jenna had insisted on hosting. Her parents were there, sitting at the long oak table polished to a shine. The chandelier overhead threw light that felt too bright, exposing everything, every wrinkle on my face, every stain on my shirt cuff, every detail that screamed I didn't belong. I had brought a bottle of red wine, not expensive, but good, something I'd been saving. When I placed it on the table, Jenna gave me a smile too sweet to be genuine. "Oh, thanks, Max," she said, sliding it to the far end of the counter unopened. Minutes later, her father placed his imported bottle in the center, and that was the one everyone toasted with. I tried not to let it sting, but it did. Dinner was served conversation, flowing easily about vacations, promotions, and the stock market. I sat there quiet, feeling smaller with each passing minute. Whenever I tried to join in, mentioning a story from the shop or a memory from my son's childhood, the words landed flat. Eyes darted away, or worse, Jenna's sharp look cut me down before I finished. At one point, her mother leaned forward, her manicured hand resting on her wine glass. "You must be proud," she said, glancing at my son. "He's really made something of himself." "Yes," I said, my chest swelling a little. I always knew he could, but Jenna's father interrupted with a laugh. "Well, he had good guidance. Not everyone has the vision to marry into the right family." The table chuckled. My son chuckled. And I sat there, the joke twisting in my gut. They weren't laughing with me, they were laughing at me. Later, when dessert came out, a cake Jenna had ordered from some boutique bakery, she made a comment that still burns in my ears. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with mock cheer, "why don't you just sit and enjoy? You don't need to help with the dishes. We don't want you straining yourself." The way she said "dad" like the word was borrowed, something she could toss around at will. I forced a smile, but inside I was boiling. I thought of the nights I'd scrubbed plates until midnight while my boy slept upstairs, the mornings I packed his lunches, Before heading out to the shop, the years I did everything so he'd never feel like he was missing something. And now here I was, a guest in his house, treated like an old relic that kept around out of obligation. As the evening wore on, I noticed something else. The framed photos lining the hallway, the wedding portraits, the family vacations, my son's new life, on full display. I wasn't in a single one. Not one picture. It was as though I had been erased. When it came time to leave, I thanked Jenna for dinner. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Drive safe, Max." Not Dad. Not even Father. Just Max, as if I were no more important than the mailman. On the drive home, the silence in my truck felt heavy pressing on my chest. The bottle of wine I'd brought rolled around on the floor of the passenger side, unopened, unwanted. That was the night I realized I wasn't family anymore. I was just a burden they tolerated. And I knew in some quiet corner of my heart that one day they would regret it. The holidays used to mean something in my family. When Maria was alive, Thanksgiving smelled like roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, and Christmas meant laughter spilling out from every corner of our little house. Even after she passed, I tried to keep the traditions alive for my son, for the hope that one day he'd bring his own family back to that same table. But that year, the silence was louder than any holiday song. It started with Thanksgiving. I called my son a week before, hoping we could plan something. "Maybe you can come over. I'll make the stuffing you love," I said, my voice carrying more eagerness than I wanted it to. He hesitated. I could hear Jenna in the background, her voice sharp, muffled, but clear enough to set the tone. Then he sighed. "Dad, we're actually going to Jenna's parents' place this year. They've already planned everything." I swallowed hard. "Well, maybe the day after I could heat up the turkey, we could still..." "Let's see," he cut in quickly. "I'll call you." He never did. On Thanksgiving Day, I sat at my kitchen table with a plate of reheated ham from the grocery store deli. I poured myself a glass of cheap red wine and turned on the football game, pretending the cheers from the TV were the voices of family gathered around me. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily past the window, covering the street in white. Each one seemed to mock the emptiness in my house. Christmas wasn't any better. I went all out that year, decorating the tree, stringing lights along the porch, even baking cookies, the way Maria used to. I told myself this time will be different. This time, he'll come. I wrapped gifts in neat paper and placed them under the tree. A new watch for my son, something I thought he'd like. For Jenna, a scarf I saved up for soft cashmere in her favorite color. And for the baby, the grandchild I barely got to hold, I bought a wooden rocking horse, the kind that could last generations. I called 2 days before Christmas. "The house is ready," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Dinner's at 6. I've got everything set just like old times." There was a pause, then a polite cough. "Dad, about Christmas, Jenna's family already made plans. Big dinner, lots of relatives. You know how it is." My throat tightened. "But I made a place for you. For all of you." "I know, Dad. I'm sorry. We'll try to swing by after the holidays." The call ended, leaving me staring at the blinking lights on the tree. Red, green, mocking, mechanical, endless. On Christmas Eve, I lit the candles alone. I laid out the plates, carved the turkey, and poured 2 glasses of wine, one for me, one that stayed untouched. The chair across from me sat empty, a silent reminder of the family that no longer saw me as part of theirs. I tried to eat, but every bite tasted like ashes. I looked at the gifts under the tree and felt a pang so sharp it nearly broke me. They would never be opened, never be cherished. After dinner, I walked outside, the cold biting through my jacket. Houses around me glowed with warmth, children's laughter, the clinking of glasses, music drifting through frosted windows. I stood there on my porch, the snow crunching under my boots, and whispered into the night, "Merry Christmas." The words vanished into the darkness. That was the moment I began to understand traditions mean nothing, when the people you built them for decide you don't matter anymore. And for the first time, I felt the stirring of something unfamiliar inside me. Not just sadness, not just loneliness, but anger. A week after that hollow Christmas, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I got up, padded into the living room, and opened the old desk drawer where I kept my papers. Bills, receipts, mortgage statements, all the evidence of a life spent giving. The drawer groaned as I pulled it open. Inside was a stack of manila folders, edges frayed from years of being shuffled around. I set them on the table and began to flip through. The first folder held the mortgage papers. I remembered the day like it was yesterday. My son was 26, just married Jenna, talking about wanting a fresh start in a better neighborhood. They couldn't afford it, not even close. But I wanted him to have more than I ever did. So I signed my name on the dotted line, co-signed the loan, and promised the bank my life if he couldn't pay. Payment records spilled out $2,300 a month. I traced the numbers with my finger. Year after year, I covered the shortfalls, telling myself it was temporary. By the 5th year, I had given nearly $70 zero. The next folder was labeled Education. My son's college tuition. 4 years at Washington State University. I had worked double shifts at the shop, taking on jobs my body wasn't meant for: bent backs, grease-stained hands, calluses that never healed. I sold Maria's jewelry to make one payment, cashed out a small retirement account for another. A letter from the bursar's office lay tucked inside balance, cleared in full. My signature scrawled at the bottom. No one else's. Another folder, medical bills. Jenna's pregnancy had complications. Insurance only covered part of it. I remember sitting in that hospital waiting room, praying for their safety while simultaneously swiping my card for $12 zero to cover what insurance didn't. And then there were the little things. A loan for a car that was never repaid. Utility bills just until payday. Grocery receipts where I had filled their pantry because Jenna complained she couldn't shop on a budget. Each slip of paper was like a scar, faded but permanent. As the pile grew, the anger inside me simmered hotter. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples. My son never asked where the money came from, never wondered how I managed to keep giving. He just took assuming I'd always be there, the eternal safety net. I picked up one old bank statement, yellowed at the edges. The balance at the bottom was barely enough to keep the lights on, yet the outflow showed payment after payment: mortgage, car loan, credit card. I remembered that month clearly. I had skipped meals, cut my medicine in half, all to make sure they didn't fall behind. And for what to be told, I was too old in embarrassment. I stacked the papers neatly into a binder, page after page, year after year. It was more than numbers. It was a chronicle of my sacrifice, my ledger of love, and now it was also my evidence. As I closed the binder, I whispered to the empty room, "They think I'm a burden. Let's see how they feel when the world knows who really carried who." For the first time in years, I felt something almost like control. The game wasn't over. Not yet. Winter clung to the neighborhood like a heavy coat, the kind you couldn't quite shrug off. Every house on Maplewood Street seemed to glow with warmth. Cars lined driveways. Laughter leaked through windows, and the smell of cinnamon and pine drifted into the night air. Except mine. My porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the snowdrifts. The driveway was bare, no extra cars parked, no footprints but mine. And people noticed. It was Mrs. Henderson who spoke first. She lived 3 doors down, a widow like me, though she had 3 grown daughters who still visited every Sunday. One afternoon, she showed up at my door with a plate of ginger cookies. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her breath clouding as she said softly, "Max, are you all right? I didn't see your son's car over the holidays." I forced a smile. They were busy. Jenna's family had plans. She hesitated, eyes scanning the undecorated corner of the living room, where the gift still sat unopened. "Busy," she echoed, disbelief lacing her tone. "Every year, Max, it doesn't sound right." I shrugged, unwilling to spill the truth. But neighbors talk. By the following week, Mr. Alvarez from across the street stopped me while I was shoveling snow. "Max," he said, leaning on his cane, "you deserve better than being left alone on Christmas. We all saw the lights off, no cars in the drive. People are starting to wonder." I chuckled bitterly. "Wonder what? Wonder why your boy doesn't treat you like the father you are." His voice was firm-edged with quiet indignation. Their concern should have warmed me, but instead it stung. Each well-meaning word was like salt on an open wound, a reminder of how public my humiliation had become. My family's rejection wasn't just mine anymore. It was something the whole neighborhood could see. And they kept seeing. At the grocery store, Mrs. Lee from down the block spotted me in the canned goods aisle. "Oh, Max," she said gently. "I thought for sure you'd be at your son's for dinner." Jenna's family always throws such big parties. I clenched the handle of the shopping cart, the metal biting into my palm. "I wasn't invited," I admitted before I could stop myself. The words hung there raw and heavy. Her face softened. She reached out, squeezed my arm. "That's not right. That's not how family should be." When I walked home with my bags, I realized something important. The whispers weren't just pity anymore. They were becoming judgment. Not of me, but of them. My son, Jenna. Their polished image was beginning to crack in the eyes of those around us. And that was when a thought sharp and undeniable began to form in my mind. If they wanted to erase me, I'd make sure the world saw exactly who they were before I disappeared from their lives. That evening, I sat with my binder of sacrifices open in front of me. I imagined the neighbors, those kind souls who brought cookies, who noticed the empty driveway, who cared enough to whisper behind hands. They would be the first to know. They would be the audience when I finally laid it all bare. Because revenge wasn't always about shouting. Sometimes it was about letting silence speak louder, letting absence tell its own story until everyone could see the truth. I closed the binder, ran my hand over its worn cover, and felt a strange calm. The whispers had started. Soon they would turn into voices, and when they did, I'd be ready. It was late January when I first saw them again. The snow had begun to thaw, leaving gray slush along the curbs, and the air carried that damp chill that seeps into your bones. I went to the grocery store to pick up simple groceries for a simple man. The parking lot was crowded. Families loaded carts with bulk items, kids tugged on parents' coats begging for candy. I pushed my cart through the sliding doors, keeping my head down when a familiar laugh cut through the noise. Jenna's laugh. I froze. There she was, my daughter-in-law, wearing a sleek winter coat, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that reached her eyes, only when directed at the people she cared about. My son was beside her, looking tired, but trying to keep up appearances, and in the shopping cart sat my grandson, cheeks rosy under a little knit hat. My chest tightened. That was the child I had longed to hold, to spoil, to teach how to ride a bike. But the child looked right past me, too young to know who I was, too young to know he even had another grandfather. I stood there, rooted to the ground, when Jenna's eyes locked on me. For a moment her smile faltered, then reappeared colder, sharper. "Well," she said loudly, drawing attention from a nearby couple, "if it isn't Max." Out shopping alone again, my son shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Dad," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "Hello," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Jenna crossed her arms. "Funny, we didn't see you at Christmas." "Oh, that's right, you weren't invited." A few shoppers paused, curious. The words echoed louder than they should have. My son's face flushed crimson, but he didn't correct her. He didn't defend me. I clenched the cart handle so hard my knuckles turned white. I could have shouted then, listed every dollar I'd paid, every sacrifice I'd made. But instead, I did something worse for them. I smiled. "You're right," I said calmly. "I wasn't invited, but that's okay. I had company anyway." Her brows furrowed, suspicious. "Company, yes," I replied, my eyes never leaving hers. "Neighbors. People who actually wanted me there." The couple standing nearby exchanged a look. Mrs. Lee, who happened to be walking by, gave me the faintest nod of solidarity. The truth was spreading without me having to shout. Jenna sniffed, turning back to her cart. "Come on," she said to my son. "We have better things to do than small talk." But as they wheeled past me, I caught the hesitation in my son's eyes. For just a flicker of a moment, he looked ashamed. I left the store with my groceries, the cold wind biting my face, but inside I felt a strange warmth. It wasn't victory, not yet, But it was the first crack in their polished mask, the first public reminder that they hadn't erased me completely. Driving home, I thought about the binder waiting on my table, about the whispers that had already begun, about the eyes in that store today, watching, listening. Humiliation didn't always need a stage. Sometimes a grocery store aisle was enough to plant the seed. And seeds, when planted in the right soil, always grow. It was a Sunday afternoon when Rosa showed up at my door. She never called ahead, never had to. We'd grown up in the same house, sharing the same roof and hardships, and her knock was always familiar, like a second heartbeat. I opened the door to find her standing there with a casserole dish in her hands, wrapped in foil steam still rising. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, her dark hair streaked with silver like mine. "You're too skinny, Max," she said before even stepping inside, "and your house looks colder than a funeral parlor. Let me in before I freeze to death." I smiled faintly and moved aside. She breezed in her presence, filling the empty spaces in my living room. She set the casserole on the counter and scanned the room, her eyes settling on the stack of binders and papers spread out on the dining table. "What's all this?" she asked, already walking toward it. "My life's work," I said quietly. "Proof of everything I gave, everything I sacrificed." She opened one of the binders and flipped through her face, hardening with each page mortgage receipts, tuition bills, medical statements. Finally, she shut it with a sharp thud. "Max," she said, her voice sharp, but not unkind, "why are you torturing yourself with this? You don't need proof. You already know what you did for him." "It's not for me," I replied, sinking into a chair. "It's for the world. For when they try to erase me completely." She studied me, arms folded. "You're thinking about revenge." "Not revenge," I said, though even I didn't believe the words. "Just justice." Her eyes softened. She sat across from me, leaning forward. "I know you love him. He's your son. But Max, sometimes love means stopping the bleeding. You can't let them keep cutting pieces out of you." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat nearly choking me. "He called me a burden, Rosa, in front of everyone, like I was an old coat that no one wanted to wear anymore." Her hand covered mine, warm and firm. "Then show them you're not a burden. Show them you're the backbone they can't stand straight without." I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks I felt seen. Rosa had always been the fierce one, the one who never let anyone step on her. She had fought for her place in the world while I had quietly given mine away. "You know what people are saying in the neighborhood?" she continued. "They see it, Max. They see how they treat you. You're not invisible, not to us. And if you ever decide to tell your story, you'll have a whole street standing behind you." Her words settled deep in my chest. The binder wasn't just evidence anymore. It was ammunition. And Rosa, my sister, who had never backed down from anyone, was telling me to use it. We ate the casserole together that evening, the house filled with warmth, for the first time in a long time. As she left, Rosa kissed my cheek and whispered, "Promise me one thing. Don't let them write the ending for you. Write it yourself." I stood at the doorway after she left, watching her taillights fade down the street, the snow swirling in their glow. Write it myself. Yes. For the first time, I believed I could. The night after Rosa's visit, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The words she'd whispered looping in my head, "Don't let them write the ending for you. Write it yourself." For years, I had let my son and Jenna script my role. The silent provider, the man in the background, the burden too old to matter. But what if I flipped the script? What if instead of erasing me, I forced them to face the truth in front of everyone they were trying to impress? The idea grew slowly, like a storm cloud swelling on the horizon. At first, it was a vague ache, a restless energy. Then it sharpened into something tangible, evidence. The binder wasn't just my private ledger of sacrifice anymore. It was a weapon, a confession wrapped in numbers and receipts. I pulled it out from the drawer again, setting it on the kitchen table. I opened to the first page, the mortgage payments I'd covered month after month. Then the tuition checks, the down payment, slips, the credit card statements for repairs, utilities, even groceries. Each line told a story of giving. Each dollar had been my silent vow of love, and each page would become their undoing. But revenge, I realized, couldn't be whispered. It had to be seen. It had to be undeniable. I thought about the grocery store, the way Jenna had mocked me in public, the way bystanders had watched with pity or disgust. That was humiliation, yes, but not final. No, the real strike had to land when the stakes were highest. Christmas, Thanksgiving, a wedding. The very holidays they had stolen from me would become the stage where I took back my dignity. I imagined it clearly, standing in a room full of their friends' neighbors, co-workers, people whose approval Jenna craved like oxygen. I would open the binder, lay the truth bare, and watch their polished image collapse under the weight of my sacrifices. For the first time in years, I smiled to myself. Not out of joy, but out of clarity. The storm wasn't coming, it was already here. And I would be the one to unleash it. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Could I do it? From anticipation. That night, I wrote in my old notebook, the one I used to keep work logs in back when I was running job sites planned for Christmas Eve. Invite Rosa. Invite neighbors, church friends. Gather copies of every receipt. Speak the truth clearly. No yelling. No shame. Burn the past, literally. Fireplace final act. When I finished writing, I felt lighter. The storm inside me wasn't just chaos anymore. It was direction. The next morning, as I shoveled the walkway, Mrs. Henderson waved from her porch. Max, she called, thinking of hosting something this year we'd love to come by. Her words carried more weight than she knew. Yes, I said, my breath clouding in the cold air. This year, there will be dinner. She smiled, and for once, so did I. The storm was gathering, and when it broke, everyone would feel it. The following week, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of envelopes, something I hadn't done in years. Most people just sent texts these days, but a text felt too casual, too easy to ignore. An envelope, though addressed in careful handwriting, sealed with intention, demanded attention. I wrote the first name slowly, Mrs. Henderson. My neighbor for over 20 years. She had seen me mow lawns at dusk. After double shifts, had brought soup when Maria was sick, and had stood on my porch the night I buried her. If anyone knew my story, it was her. She would come no matter what. Then Rosa. My sister deserved the front row. She had been my voice when mine failed, my shield when I was too tired to lift one. I paused before the next envelope, Father Daniel. The priest at our church, a man who had quietly slipped grocery cards into my coat pocket when money was thin, who had prayed with me outside hospital doors. His presence would carry weight and authority Jenna and her family couldn't easily dismiss. One by one, the list grew. The Garcias, who had lived across the street since Michael was in high school. Old Mr. Thompson, who still remembered when I framed the porch for him at half price. These weren't just neighbors. They were witnesses. By the time I finished, a dozen envelopes sat in a neat stack, sealed with my resolve. I slipped on my coat and began delivering them by hand. The first stop was Mrs. Henderson's. She opened the door before I even knocked the smell of cinnamon rolls drifting out. Max, she said warmly, come in, it's freezing out there. I handed her the envelope. It's an invitation. Christmas Eve. I'm hosting dinner. Her eyes widened slightly. Dinner you haven't hosted since Maria. I know, I said softly. But this year, it's different. This year, I need people there. People who know the truth. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll be there. And Max, good for you. The words settled in me like kindling catching fire. At the church, Father Daniel accepted his envelope with a gentle smile. Sometimes, he said, patting my shoulder, the truth needs an audience. I'll be there, Max, and I'll be praying you find peace in it. Even the Garcias, busy with their grandchildren, promised they wouldn't miss it. You were there when our roof collapsed, Mr. Garcia reminded me. It's about time we return the favor. As I walked home, the snow crunching under my boots, I felt something I hadn't in years' anticipation. Not for gifts, not for carols, but for a reckoning. Back in the warmth of my kitchen, I looked at the one envelope I hadn't delivered addressed to my son. My hand hovered over it, then slowly set it aside. No, he didn't need an invitation. He had already been invited every year and every sacrifice I made. This dinner wasn't for him. This dinner was for me. I slid the last envelope into the drawer and whispered to the empty house, "This Christmas the chair won't be empty." And for once I believed it. It didn't take long for word of my invitations to spread. This town had always been small enough that a whisper on one porch became a story by the time it reached the grocery store. And grocery stores were Jenna's battlefield, her runway, her stage. She was in line at the bakery counter when Mrs. Garcia, oblivious to Jenna's sharp ears, said to another woman, "Isn't it nice Max is finally hosting again? Christmas Eve, dinner. Everyone's going." The words hit Jenna like a slap. She turned her smile tight. "Excuse me, did you say Max is hosting something?" Mrs. Garcia's surprise blinked. "Yes, dear. He invited us just yesterday. Said it was important." Jenna's nails tapped against the bakery counter. "Important," she repeated, her voice colder than the frosting on the cakes. By the time she got home, Michael was already in the living room, scrolling through his phone. She slammed her purse on the table. "Did you know about this?" He looked up confused. "About what, your father?" she snapped. "He's planning some kind of dinner. Christmas Eve. Half the neighborhood's already invited." Michael frowned. "Dinner, that doesn't sound like him. He hasn't hosted anything since Mom died." "That's exactly my point," Jenna said, pacing the room. "If he's suddenly inviting everyone, it means something. And you know how people talk in this town. He could be planning to, I don't know, dirty laundry, embarrass us." Michael shifted uncomfortably, the words landing too close to home. He remembered the binder he'd glimpsed at once, pages of bills and payments his father had covered for years. Payments Michael had promised to repay but never did. "What if he shows everyone?" Jenna continued, her voice rising. "The mortgage, the tuition, the utilities. All of it. Do you have any idea how that would look your colleagues, my parents, humiliated because of him?" Michael rubbed his temples. "Jenna, you're jumping to conclusions. Maybe it's just a dinner. He's lonely." "Lonely?" she shot back. "He's dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose is dangerous, Michael. Don't you get it?" The words lingered. Dangerous. Max had never raised a hand in anger, never so much as raised his voice louder than a storm outside. But the thought of him turning all those quiet sacrifices into a spectacle, Michael could picture it, and it terrified him. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "Find out," Jenna said, her tone sharp. "Talk to him. Stop him before he ruins everything we've built." Michael looked away, guilt tightening his chest. Everything we've built. The house, the cars, the dinners Jenna loved to host, all of it was built on his father's silent sacrifices. That night, as he lay in bed, Michael stared at the ceiling just as I had days before. He remembered the Christmas mornings when his father would sit by the tree, face weary, but smiling, watching Michael tear open gifts, bought with money Max didn't have. And now the man who gave him everything was about to take back the one thing Jenna valued most, their image. Michael closed his eyes, knowing one thing for certain: Christmas Eve was no longer just another holiday. It was a storm waiting to break. 3 nights before Christmas Eve, there was a knock on my door just as I was setting down a cup of tea. It wasn't the soft, neighborly knock I was used to. This one was heavy and patient, like a fist demanding entry rather than requesting it. When I opened the door, Michael stood there. His coat collar was turned up against the cold, but the nervous flicker in his eyes had nothing to do with winter air. He looked older than the boy I'd raised, but younger than the man he was supposed to be, caught somewhere between guilt and fear. "Dad," he said, forcing a half smile. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "You know you're always welcome here." But as he walked in, his eyes weren't on me. They darted around the house, scanning the kitchen table, the counters, the shelves, searching for something. He was looking for the binder. "You've been busy," he said, nodding at the envelopes still stacked neatly by the window. Inviting people over, I sat back down in my chair, cradling the tea between my hands. "Yes, Dinner on Christmas Eve. It's been a long time since this house was full of voices. He shifted his weight uneasily. Why now? Dad, why all of a sudden you've never done this since Mom passed? I looked at him evenly. Maybe I finally realized silence isn't the same as peace. Michael's jaw tightened. Look, I just want to make sure this dinner, it isn't about me. Or Jenna. Right there it was. The real reason he'd come. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about exposure. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, until he squirmed. Then I said, you tell me, son. Should it be about you? His face flushed. Dad, come on. Please don't do anything to embarrass us. Jenna's parents, people in town, it'll look bad. Embarrass you, I repeated softly, setting down my cup. Michael, do you know what embarrassment feels like? It's standing at your own table with a plate of food getting cold, while the seat across from you stays empty year after year. That's embarrassment. That's humiliation. He swallowed hard but pressed on. I just don't want drama. I stood then, and he flinched at the scrape of my chair against the floor. Drama, my voice was calm, but iron threaded through it. Drama is when a man spends his life building something for his son only to be told he's too old, too poor, too inconvenient. Drama is sacrifice turned invisible. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I walked to the mantel where Maria's photo still sat framed in quiet dignity. Your mother used to say the truth always finds its way to the surface. Maybe she was right. Maybe this Christmas, it's time the truth had a seat at the table. Michael's eyes flickered to the fireplace, then back to me. He knew. He knew I had something prepared, something he couldn't stop. Finally, he said, almost pleading, Dad, please, if you care about me, don't do this. I turned, meeting his gaze squarely. If you cared about me, I wouldn't have to. The words hung in the air like frost. He shifted, wanting to argue, but too shaken to try. After a long pause, he muttered, Merry Christmas, Dad, and walked out the door. I stood there listening to his footsteps crunch away in the snow, the silence that followed heavier than the winter night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one being begged. This time it was my turn to refuse. By the time the church bells tolled on Sunday morning, half the town already knew about my Christmas Eve dinner. I hadn't gone out of my way to advertise, but in a place like ours, secrets spread faster than smoke in winter air. At Henderson's grocery, whispers trailed between aisles of flour and canned goods. Did you hear Max is hosting again? At the barber shop, the men leaned in over the buzz of clippers. He's inviting everyone but his own son. Wonder what that means. And outside the church after service, I could feel the eyes on me. Mrs. Peterson stopped me on the steps, her hands clutching a hymn book. Max, dear, is it true you're holding Christmas dinner? I smiled faintly. Yes, ma'am. You and your husband are welcome. Her eyebrows rose just a little too high. Well, how wonderful. After so long. But behind her smile, I saw the questions brewing. By Monday, the gossip had become rumor, and rumor had become story. Some said I was remarrying. Others whispered I was selling the house. A few insisted I had come into money and wanted to show it off. But the version that clung the hardest was the one Michael feared most. Max is planning something. Something big. Jenna heard it at the country club. Apparently he's got binders one of her friends laughed over cocktails, full of papers, proof of everything he's ever done for Michael. Can you imagine he'll air it all like dirty laundry? Jenna's face stayed composed, but her hand trembled slightly around the glass. People love to exaggerate, she said, but the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I went about my errands with steady steps, neither confirming nor denying. Every nod I gave, every polite "we'll see," only seemed to stoke the fire. That night, Rosa called me. Max, she said gently, you've got the whole town buzzing. What are you planning? I chuckled softly. Just dinner, Rosa. Just dinner. But she wasn't fooled. You're playing with matches in a room full of kindling. Be careful. After we hung up, I sat by the window watching the snow drift down in thick silence. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson's house glowed warm with Christmas lights, her grandchildren's laughter spilling out onto the porch. I wondered if they too were asking what I was up to. Inside my house, the binder sat on the table like a silent guest waiting. Its weight wasn't just paper, it was years of sacrifice receipts that spelled out a man's devotion in dollars and cents. The town's gossip didn't scare me. In fact, it gave me strength. For once, it was Michael and Jenna who were restless pacing floors and houses I had helped them keep. For once, it was they who feared the judgment of others. And isn't that justice in its earliest form, to let the truth simmer in whispers before it boils into revelation? As I turned off the lamp and climbed into bed, I let the rumors run their course. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Because on Christmas Eve, there would be no more whispers. Only truth. And this time, it would be spoken out loud with the whole town listening. By Tuesday morning, Jenna's composure had begun to crack. Normally, she carried herself like she was walking a runway, even in the grocery store, even in her own living room. But when I saw her that week, or rather when others told me about her, the cracks were showing. At the coffee shop, she'd snapped at a barista for forgetting whipped cream. At the post office, she fumbled her wallet, scattering cards across the counter. Little slips, little breaks in the perfect image she had curated for years. At home, Michael felt the full brunt of it. "Do you realize what your father is doing?" Jenna hissed as she slammed a magazine onto the kitchen counter. People are talking. At the club. At the school. Everywhere, Michael rubbed his temples, his face drawn. "It's just gossip. Dad's always been a little dramatic. He won't actually do anything." Jenna turned on him, eyes blazing. "Won't do anything? He's inviting half the neighborhood for Christmas dinner." Why now, Michael? Why, after 3 years of ignoring him, Michael looked away, guilt flickering across his features. "Maybe he just wants company." "Company?" Jenna scoffed. "Don't be naive. He's building a case against us. You think he hasn't kept records? Every mortgage payment, every bill, every dollar he funneled into this family? He's going to humiliate us?" The word humiliate hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't anger I heard in her voice, it was fear. That night, after she thought Michael was asleep, Jenna sat in the dim glow of her laptop. She searched for lawyers, Googled contest inheritance, and even drafted an email to her parents about potential reputational issues. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing and erasing, typing and erasing. But there's something gossip does that no lawyer can undo. It seeps into the fabric of community. By Wednesday, even the kids at the high school were whispering. "Did you hear Mrs. Flores' father-in-law is planning something big for Christmas Eve?" Jenna felt the walls closing in. She tried to maintain her facade, smiling at the holiday market, complimenting neighbors' decorations. But when she caught Mrs. Henderson giving her a pitying look, her smile faltered. At dinner that evening, Jenna dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter. "Michael, listen to me. If your father does what I think he's planning, it will ruin us. Do you understand? Everything we've built, our reputation, our circle, it'll be gone?" Michael sighed, exhausted. "What do you want me to do, Jenna? He's my father." Jenna leaned in, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Then act like it. Control him. Shut this down before it's too late." But what she didn't know was this: it already was too late. Because while she scrambled in panic, I was calm. While she reached for lawyers and excuses, I reached for the truth. And truth, once spoken, has a way of burning through every lie it touches. Christmas Eve was coming, and this time, I wasn't the one who'd be left sitting alone. On Thursday morning, I stood in line at the post office with a stack of cream-colored envelopes tucked under my arm. Each one bore my handwriting, steady, deliberate kind of script I hadn't used in years. Writing them had taken the better part of a night, but I'd felt something different with each name I wrote power. The woman behind the counter, Nancy, raised her eyebrows as I slid the envelopes across to be stamped. "Well, Max, looks like you're planning something special." I smiled faintly. "Christmas Eve dinner. Thought it was about time." Her expression softened. "That's wonderful. People have missed seeing you host." I thanked her, gathered my receipts, and walked back into the sharp December air. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, clinging to my coat. As I headed home, I imagined each envelope finding its way to familiar mailboxes. Mrs. Henderson's, the Garcias, the Petersons. even Father Daniel at the rectory. People who knew the truth. People who had stood witness to the sacrifices I'd made over the years. But there was one name missing from the stack. Michael. I had written it on a draft envelope, stared at it for a long while, and then ripped it in half. He didn't need an invitation. He had been invited every year, and every meal I cooked, every bill I paid, every late-night ride when his car broke down. And every time he had chosen to ignore it, this time the table would be set for people who wanted to be there. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote Christmas Eve dinner, December 24, the 60 p.m. Beneath it, I scrawled the guest list in neat columns. As the names filled the page, a warmth spread in my chest. For once, the chairs around my table would not sit empty. Across town, the first envelopes began to arrive. Mrs. Henderson called almost immediately. "Max, I got your invitation," she said, her voice thick with something like relief. "I'll be there. And I'll bring the cinnamon rolls. Maria always loved them. Father Daniel stopped me after Mass. I'll be honored to attend. And Max, sometimes the truth has to be told in the light of fellowship." Even Rosa, when she received hers, called me late into the night. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" she whispered. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm done being silent." But not everyone took the news so gracefully. By Friday morning, word had spread to Michael and Jenna. Jenna stormed into the kitchen, waving an opened envelope she'd taken from her parents' mailbox. "Do you see this?" she hissed, slapping it on the counter. "He's inviting the whole neighborhood. Everyone but us." Michael looked down at the paper, his face pale. "Maybe he just doesn't want to fight." Jenna's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Oh no. This isn't peacekeeping, Michael. This is war. He's staging something public. And if you don't stop him, he'll burn this family's name to the ground." Michael rubbed the back of his neck, torn between fear and loyalty. But deep down, I think he knew it was too late to stop me, because the invitations were already in their hands. The stage was set. And this Christmas, the truth would finally have an audience. By Saturday morning, my phone was buzzing more than it had in years. Texts, voicemails, even handwritten notes slipped into my mailbox. Each one was an answer to the invitations I had sent out. "Max, I'll bring the mashed potatoes. Wouldn't be Christmas without them. Count us in, we've missed your cooking. My kids are so excited to come, Mr. Flores. They've always loved your stories." One by one, the confirmations stacked up like ornaments on a tree. For the first time in a long while, the house that had once echoed with silence seemed to hum with anticipation. I sat at the table, the guest list in front of me, checking off each name with a steady hand. Henderson's, yes. Garcia's, yes. Peterson's, yes. Father Daniel confirmed. 20 names in total, and each one a reminder that while blood may have turned its back on me, community had not. Yet there was one name absent from all those messages. Michael. I knew he wouldn't call. Still, a part of me had waited, watching the phone like a fool. But no. The silence stretched unbroken, only by the distant sound of carolers outside. Across town, Jenna was not so quiet. At the country club, she cornered her friend Marissa by the fireplace. "Can you believe it? He's hosting Christmas Eve dinner. Our father-in-law. Inviting everyone like it's some kind of circus." Marissa blinked. "Well, maybe he just wants company. Poor man's been alone a while, hasn't he?" Jenna's face twisted. "Don't pity him. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's going to humiliate us in front of everyone." Her voice carried farther than she realized. By the next morning, word had spread even faster. Neighbors whispered at the market and pews. At Sunday service over coffee in diners, Max Flores was hosting a Christmas Eve dinner, and it wasn't just a meal, it was going to be a reckoning. I kept my preparations simple. No elaborate decorations, no hired caterers. Just the dishes Maria used to make, the ones that had once brought us together: roasted turkey, candied yams, green bean casserole. I set the table with the old china we'd gotten as a wedding gift, every plate polished until it gleamed. Still, as I smoothed the tablecloth, a wave of doubt swept over me. Was I really ready to put years of sacrifice into words to expose everything I had given and everything I had lost? I closed my eyes, breathing in the faint scent of cinnamon that lingered from Mrs. Henderson's promised rolls. The answer came steady, yes. I had been silent too long. That evening, Rosa called again. Her voice was soft, cautious. Max, are you sure about this? Once you say the words, there's no going back? I know, I said. But it's not about going back. It's about finally moving forward. There was a pause. Then quietly, I'll be there. When the line went dead, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the roof and the bare branches in white. My house glowed with warm light spilling from the windows. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a prison of solitude. It felt like a stage. And Christmas Eve was nearly here. It was the afternoon before Christmas Eve when the pounding came at my door. Not the gentle knock of a neighbor with cookies, not the quick rap of a delivery boy, but a hard, angry rhythm that shook the wood in its frame. I opened it to find Jenna standing there, cheeks flushed from the cold eyes blazing hotter than any winter fire. Her coat was buttoned tight, her nails perfectly manicured, but her composure was cracked, her fury spilling through every gesture. Max, she said sharply, not bothering with a greeting. We need to talk. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Then, talk. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her heels clicking against the hardwood I had refinished with my own hands years ago. She glanced around the dining room at the neatly set table, the polished silverware, the chairs lined up like soldiers awaiting duty. Her lip curled. So it's true. You really invited half the neighborhood. You're actually going through with this circus. I kept my voice calm. It's not a circus. It's Christmas dinner. She turned on me, eyes narrowing. Don't play dumb. You think I don't know what this is? You're planning to embarrass us? To shame Michael. To shame me. I met her glare evenly. If the truth embarrasses you, Jenna, maybe that's not my problem. Her breath caught just for a second before she recovered. You're old, Max. Bitter. You don't know how the world works anymore. You'll make a fool of yourself, and when you do, don't think anyone will be on your side. I gestured toward the envelopes stacked on the counter, RSVP notes tucked inside. Funny. Looks like plenty of people are already on my side. For the first time, her mask slipped. She faltered, staring at the names scrawled in different hands. Neighbors, church friends, even people from the grocery store. The weight of the community pressing against her arrogance. You can't just erase family like this, she hissed finally. My voice was steady. Family erased me a long time ago. Tomorrow I'm simply telling the truth. Jenna's nails tapped a sharp rhythm against the back of a chair. Do you have any idea what you're risking? Michael's career, our reputation built on lies, doesn't deserve to last. I interrupted. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For once, she had no retort. The silence stretched. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the branches against the windows. Inside, the tension was thicker than the scent of pine from the wreath on my mantel. Finally, Jenna grabbed her purse, her movements stiff, mechanical. She turned back at the doorway, her eyes like shards of glass. You'll regret this, Max. One way or another, you will regret it. I didn't flinch. No. For the first time in years, I won't. The door slammed behind her, shaking the frame. I stood alone in the quiet house, the echo of her threat still vibrating in the air. But beneath it all, I felt something stronger: resolve. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. The table was set, the evidence ready. And no matter how hard Jenna tried to silence me, the truth would be louder than her pride. The snow began falling heavier that afternoon, thick white flakes tumbling from the sky and layering the neighborhood in silence. To me, it felt like Spokane itself was pausing, waiting for what was to come. I woke early the way I used to before Maria and I hosted family holidays. The house buzzed with quiet energy pots simmering on the stove, turkey roasting in the oven, the faint scent of cloves and cinnamon in the air. For years, those smells had meant love and laughter. Tonight, they meant something else: resolution. By 4 o'clock, the first knock came. It was Rosa, my sister, carrying 2 steaming trays covered in foil. Her eyes softened when she saw the candles already glowing in the windows. "Max," she whispered, giving my hand a squeeze. "It feels like Maria's here tonight." Soon after, Mrs. Henderson shuffled in her wool coat, dusted with snow, clutching her famous Parker house rolls. "Wouldn't miss this for the world," she said, patting my arm. Behind her, the Garcias arrived then, the Petersons, then Father Daniel from the parish, each with a dish in hand, each with a word of encouragement. One by one, they filled my house. The dining room, once so quiet, came alive with voices and laughter coats, piled high by the door boots, leaving wet prints across the floor. For the first time in years, the air didn't ache with emptiness. It hummed with community. But amid the warmth, there was an undercurrent of tension. Everyone knew. They hadn't come just for turkey and pie. They had come because they had heard whispers about Jenna, about Michael, about the sacrifices I had made and the silence I had endured. Tonight, truth was on the menu as much as the food. As I moved through the room, topping off glasses of wine, setting out bowls of cranberry relish, I caught fragments of conversation. "Can you believe his own son won't come shameful? After all, Max has done for him. He's braver than I'd be to stand up like this." I didn't join in. I just kept moving my hands steady, though my heart beat like a drum in my chest. At 6 sharp, I took my place at the head of the table. 20 chairs lined the room, each filled by someone who had chosen to be there. The candles flickered against faces. I trusted faces that carried expectation. At the far end of the table, Rosa nodded at me. A silent queue. Yet one chair remained empty, the one I had set for Michael out of habit more than hope. Its vacancy was louder than any presence. I lifted my glass, my voice quiet but firm. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight isn't just about Christmas. It's about truth. And before this night ends, you'll understand why." The room stilled. Forks lowered, conversations hushed. Outside, the snow pressed harder against the windows, muffling the world beyond. Inside, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. It was time. The clinking of forks on porcelain had faded. Every whisper died down until the only sound left was the faint hiss of the fireplace and the muffled whistle of wind outside. 20 faces turned toward me, waiting. Some curious, some nervous, but all expectant. I stood slowly, the old chair scraping against the floor. My knees ached, but my voice carried stronger than it had in years. "I need to tell you all something tonight," I began, my hands resting on the back of the chair in front of me. "And it won't be easy to hear, but truth rarely is." Rosa reached for her wineglass, eyes wet, already bracing herself. Father Daniel leaned in. Mrs. Henderson held her rolls tight in her lap like a talisman. I turned toward the empty chair, the one I had left at the far end of the table. "That seat should have been filled tonight," I said quietly, "by my son." The air shifted. People glanced at each other, the absence louder than anything else. "But he's not here, and I need you to know why." I walked to the sideboard where a thick binder lay waiting. Its cover worn, the edges frayed. Inside were 5 years' worth of documents, bank transfers, mortgage receipts, property tax bills, college tuition slips. Every page stained with sacrifice. I opened it and pulled out the first sheet, holding it high. December 2016. Mortgage payment, $2,300. From my account, not his. Why? Because he couldn't afford it. I flipped to another. March 2018. Hospital bills for his wife? $6,400. Insurance didn't cover it. I stepped in. Another page. My voice grew harder, louder with each word. August 2019. Down payment for the house they live in now. $45, zero. Every cent I had saved after Maria passed. I gave it up so my son could have a future. Gasps rippled through the table. I saw Mrs. Garcia cover her mouth. Mr. Peterson muttered, "Good Lord." I kept going, flipping page after page until the stack in my hand shook with the weight of years. "Altogether," I said, slamming the papers down on the table, "I gave them over $200, zero. My retirement, my security, everything Maria and I had planned for. Gone." all so my son could stand tall. I paused, my chest heaving. And yet I said, lowering my voice when Christmas came, when family mattered most, he told me I wasn't welcome. That I was too old, too embarrassing, too much of a burden. The words echoed in the silence, sharp as a blade. Mrs. Henderson wiped at her cheek. Rosa's fists clenched tight at her sides. Father Daniel shook his head, whispering no son should say that. I looked around the table. My throat tightened, but I pushed through. For years I sat in this house alone waiting for him, cooking meals that went cold, staring at that empty chair, pretending it didn't hurt. I moved back to the head of the table, my hand brushing the empty seat beside me. But tonight I'm done pretending. I lifted the binder high, then crossed the room to the fireplace. The flames danced in the grate, hungry and bright. This is every bill I ever paid, every sacrifice I ever made for people who decided I wasn't good enough. The guests leaned forward, breathless. I let the binder fall, open pages fluttering like broken wings. One by one I fed them to the fire. Receipts curled, black numbers disintegrated into ash. The room filled with the acrid scent of burning paper and the glow of release. Behind me, someone whispered, "My God." I turned back, the fire reflecting in my eyes. Tonight, I take back what's mine, not the money. That's gone. But my dignity, my voice, my worth, they can never take that again. For a moment, silence. Pure, heavy silence. Then Rosa began to clap slow and deliberate. Mrs. Henderson joined her. Then the Garcias. Then the Petersons. Until the entire room erupted into applause. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't stop. I stood tall, my chest rising steady as the sound washed over me. "You gave him everything," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice breaking, "and he gave you nothing. But tonight, Max, you gave yourself back." I smiled faintly, my throat raw. The empty chair at the end of the table still stood, but for the first time in years, it didn't look lonely. It looked defeated. And for once, I didn't feel defeated at all. By the time the last page of the binder turned to ash, my living room no longer felt like mine alone. It felt like a courtroom, a sanctuary, and a stage all at once. My neighbors and friends hadn't just eaten dinner here, they had witnessed a reckoning. When the applause finally faded, voices swelled in its place. "Unbelievable," muttered Mr. Peterson, shaking his head. "After all those years," whispered Rosa, still dabbing her eyes. "People deserve to know," Mrs. Garcia said firmly, her jaw set. "This story shouldn't stay inside these walls." I hadn't expected those words. My plan had been simple: tell the truth, burn the evidence, and let it end there. But it was too late for silence now. The fire's glow wasn't just warming my house, it was already sparking beyond it. By the next morning, it was everywhere. At the grocery store, 2 clerks whispered near the produce aisle, thinking I couldn't hear. "Did you hear about Max? His own son cut him off after he paid for everything." At the church potluck, Mrs. Henderson retold the scene in vivid detail, how the pages curled and blackened, how I had stood tall and said, "Tonight I take back my dignity." By the end of the week, even strangers on the street seemed to know. An old coworker from my mechanic days stopped me outside the hardware store. "Max," he said, gripping my shoulder, "you shouldn't have had to go through that. But I'm proud of you for standing up." The whispers grew into a chorus. Some shook their heads in pity at Michael and Jenna. Others spoke openly ungrateful. Spoiled. Disgraceful. It didn't take long before word reached them. Rosa was the first to tell me. She arrived one evening, cheeks flushed from the cold, her voice urgent. "They're furious, Max. Jenna told someone at the salon that you humiliated them in front of the entire community." I chuckled dryly, though my chest tightened. "I didn't humiliate them," I said. "They did that themselves. I just lit the match." Still, the fallout was swift. Jenna's parents, once proud to host extravagant dinners, found themselves cornered by whispers at their country club. Michael, who had built his career in real estate, suddenly had clients canceling showings, muttering about trust and family reputation. They had painted me as the burden. Now they were carrying the weight of their own choices. And yet, amid the storm, something unexpected happened. The same neighbors who once waved politely from across the street now stopped by with casseroles, firewood, or simply a kind word. Mrs. Henderson, frail but resolute, told me family isn't blood, Max. It's who shows up. And look around, people are showing up for you. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the man abandoned at Christmas. I felt like the man who had drawn a line, and finally people saw it. But I also knew one thing: Michael wouldn't let it rest. Humiliation like this didn't just sting, it festered. And sooner or later he would come back, searching not for reconciliation, but for control. As I stood at the window that night, watching snowflakes blur beneath the streetlight, I whispered to myself, let him come. This time, I won't be silent. It was late evening when the knock came. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, not the cheerful rhythm of Mrs. Henderson bringing pie. No, this was a heavy, relentless pounding that rattled the frame of my front door. I knew before I opened it who it was. Michael stood there in the porch light, snowflakes catching in his hair, his jaw tight, his eyes red-rimmed from anger or maybe shame. Behind him, the street lamp painted his figure in long, jagged shadows. For a moment, he looked less like my son and more like a stranger wearing his face. "Dad," he said, his voice rough, "we need to talk." I didn't step aside right away. The silence stretched my breath, fogging in the cold night air. Then slowly, I opened the door wider and let him in. Inside, the fire still glowed faintly in the hearth, the ashes of the burned papers lying quiet as tombstones. Michael's eyes darted to it instantly, his lip curling. "You had no right," he snapped, his voice low but vibrating with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us, to me? Jenna's family won't even look at us. My clients are canceling deals. Everyone in town is whispering about your little performance." I stayed standing, arms crossed, leaning against the mantel. "I didn't ruin your reputation, Michael," I said evenly. "You did that yourself when you treated your own father like a disposable bank account." He flinched, but his pride snapped back just as quickly. "You could have come to me. You could have kept this private. Instead, you made a spectacle out of it. Do you know what that feels like, to be laughed at?" My voice hardened. "Yes, son. I know exactly what that feels like. I felt it every Christmas I sat here alone while you dined in someone else's home. I felt it when your wife closed the door in my face. I felt it when you told me I was too old, too embarrassing to stand beside you. Don't talk to me about humiliation." The words seemed to slice through the air. Michael looked away, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "I made sacrifices for you," I continued, my voice rising. "I bled my savings, my retirement, every dream your mother and I had, so you could stand tall. And you erased me. So yes, I burned those papers. I burned the proof of my foolishness. But I also burned the chains you put on me." For the first time, Michael's anger faltered. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining from his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller, almost broken. "Dad, I never wanted it to go this far." I studied him, the boy I once held in my arms, now a man unraveling before me. "Then why did you let it?" I asked quietly. The silence between us was heavier than any storm. Michael's eyes glossed over, as if he wanted to say something more, but couldn't. Finally, I turned toward the door. "You should go," I said firmly. "Come back when you're ready to face what you've done, not just to me, but to yourself." Michael hesitated, his lips trembling with unspoken words. But then he nodded, defeated, and walked back into the night. The snow swallowed his figure until he was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest tight, my eyes burning. For all his anger, for all his shame, he had still come back. That meant something. A spark, small and fragile, but there. And I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The Sunday after Michael's visit, the air was sharp with the scent of pine and the bite of winter wind. I pulled on my old wool coat, the one Rosa had mended twice, and walked the familiar block toward her house. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. The table was already crowded, Rosa bustling with dishes, her husband pouring cider, Mrs. Henderson seated comfortably with her cane, leaning against the chair, and even a few kids from the church choir running about, their laughter ringing like bells. Max, Rosa beamed when she saw me. "Sit down, the roast is ready." I hesitated for half a heartbeat. The scene was so alive, so different from the cold emptiness of my own house that it almost felt foreign. But then little Sophia, the neighbor's girl, ran up and tugged my hand. "You sit by me, Mr. Max?" she chirped, her face glowing. So I did. The meal began with Grace Rose's voice, soft but steady. And as the food was passed around, steaming bowls of mashed potatoes, warm rolls fresh from the oven, slices of roast, dripping with juices, I realized something: no one here was bound to me by blood. And yet every glance, every smile carried a weight of belonging I hadn't felt in years. At one point, Mrs. Henderson leaned across the table. Her hand, paper thin but strong, rested on mine. "Max," she said. Her eyes, kind but piercing. "Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when you need them. And look around, you've got plenty of family right here." Her words sank deep. I looked around the table again, this time really seeing Rosa, who had always checked in on me, making sure I ate, making sure I wasn't drowning in silence. Her husband, who had helped fix my leaky roof without asking for a dime. Mrs. Henderson, who had lost her husband years ago, yet still carried enough compassion to share with the rest of us. For so long, I had been blinded by the idea that family meant blood, that loyalty and love were owed simply because of a shared history. But here, in this lively dining room, surrounded by mismatched voices and laughter, I felt more seen, more valued than I ever had at Michael's polished table. Halfway through the meal, Rosa raised her glass. "To Max," she said, her smile bright, for finally remembering that dignity matters more than approval. The table erupted in cheers. My cheeks flushed, and I swallowed hard, my throat tightening with something heavier than the cider I sipped. It wasn't the kind of toast I would have ever heard from my own son, but maybe that was the point. Later, as the kids played near the fireplace and the adults sank into easy conversation, I stepped outside for some air. The night was clear, the stars like diamonds scattered across the dark. Behind me, through the window, I could see their silhouettes, my new family, laughing, sharing, living. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest eased. The truth was harsh, but simple. I hadn't lost a family. I had found the right one. And as I stood there, breath misting in the cold, I whispered into the quiet, maybe this Christmas isn't about what I lost, but about what I finally gained. It was 3 days after New Year's when I heard another knock on my door. Softer this time, hesitant, like the knuckles didn't quite trust themselves. I shuffled to the door, expecting maybe Rosa or Mrs. Henderson, but when I opened it, my breath caught. Standing there was Samuel, my grandson. He looked taller than I remembered from the few stolen glimpses I'd had at Christmas gatherings years ago, broad-shouldered now with the awkward confidence of a teenager trying to become a man. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "Grandpa," he said, almost a whisper. I froze. It had been so long since anyone had called me that. The word lodged in my chest like a spark waiting for air. "Samuel," I managed. "What are you doing here?" He shifted on his feet, eyes darting to the snow at his shoes. "Dad doesn't know I came. Mom either." But his voice cracked. I had to. I had to know if what everyone's saying is true. I stepped aside, slowly motioning him in. The boy walked past me, his eyes scanning the small living room, the faint smell of wood smoke still lingering. He stopped at the mantel where his grandmother's photo rested. "I heard about the dinner," he said finally. "About the papers you burned. About all the money you gave Dad. Everyone at school's been whispering. They say you humiliated our family." The word stung, but I forced myself to keep calm. "And what do you think?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He turned to face me, his eyes wet but fierce. "I think they've been lying to me. For years. Every time I asked why we didn't see you, Mom said you didn't care. That you were bitter hard to deal with. But then I saw the numbers, how much you sacrificed. Grandpa, is it true? Did you really pay for everything I swallowed hard?" My hands shook slightly as I reached for the chair, easing myself down before I spoke. "Yes, Samuel," I said softly. "I paid the mortgage. I covered bills. I sold land-drained savings, gave every piece of myself so your father could have a life I never had. And when I was no longer convenient, when my presence embarrassed them, They shut the door. The boy's face twisted, torn between rage and sorrow. He sat down across from me, his legs bouncing with restless energy. Why didn't Dad tell me? Why didn't he just say the truth? Because pride, I answered. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting he turned his back on the man who raised him. And that's not an easy thing to face. For a long moment, we just sat there. The fire popped softly, filling the silence. Finally, Samuel leaned forward, his voice breaking. I don't care what they say. You're my grandpa, and I want to know you. I want to hear your stories, the real ones. About Dad when he was my age. About Grandma. About us. My chest tightened, a dam inside me cracking wide open. Slowly, carefully, I reached across the table and took his hand. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear her, that I whispered. His grip tightened, strong, certain. And in that moment, all the years of silence and rejection melted away, at least a little. For the first time in what felt like decades, I didn't just have hope. I had a reason to believe again. Through the window, snow began to fall, soft, steady, blanketing the world in white. Samuel looked out at it and smiled faintly. Feels like a fresh start, he murmured. And for once, I believed him. The weeks that followed Samuel's visit felt different. Lighter. For the first time in years, my mornings weren't filled with silence heavy enough to choke me. Instead, there was laughter, his laughter when he stopped by after school. There were questions about Grandma, about the business I once ran, about Christmas traditions long buried under disappointment. Each time he asked, I gave him the truth. Not the polished version his parents fed him, but the raw, honest stories. About how his father once broke the neighbor's window playing baseball and I worked overtime just to pay for the repair. About how his grandmother used to hum carols while baking pies, filling the house with a warmth no furnace could replicate. About how, despite everything, love had always been the center of this family, even when pride and arrogance tried to erase it. Samuel listened with wide eyes, nodding like every detail was a treasure. And I realized something. Though my son had rejected me, the bloodline hadn't been severed completely. The bridge wasn't gone. It just needed a new builder. And Samuel, bless him, seemed ready to lay the first stones. But even if he hadn't, I would still stand tall. Because the truth had been spoken. My sacrifices were no longer hidden in dusty drawers of receipts and bank slips. The humiliation I carried for years had been burned away in that fireplace on Christmas night. And the community, my neighbors, my sister, my church family, they had all stood by me when blood did not. That is dignity. That is freedom. On a quiet evening in late January, I stepped out onto the porch. Snow still clung to the ground, but the sky above was clear, stars blinking like candles in a vast cathedral. Behind me, the faint hum of voices drifted from the living room. Rosa, Mrs. Henderson, and Samuel gathered around a board game. Family in every sense that mattered. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the cold air fill my lungs. No longer heavy, no longer bitter, just alive. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered without irony, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me back what truly matters." Because revenge, I had learned, isn't always about destroying someone else. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is reclaiming yourself. Dear friends, watching this channel, if you followed me through this story, thank you for giving your time, your heart, and your thoughts. Life can be cruel. Family can wound us in ways deeper than strangers ever could. But dignity, self-respect, and real love, they never die if we choose to stand for them. So tonight, as we close this chapter together, I want to wish you something simple but powerful: health, peace, and a family, whether by blood or by choice, that truly values you. From my heart to yours, Merry Christmas, and may every day ahead be filled with light. If you found meaning in this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below. This isn't just my story, it's ours. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. Until the next story, God bless you and your family.